We won with highly educated. We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
Oh, America, land of the free and home of financial irresponsibility. You know those buy now, pay later pop-ups you see when you're buying something? Well, that's pretty much what our country's been doing, but with everything forever. And it appears we have a small bit of a bill starting to form. Yo, what? Nah, that can't be right. What the fuck? That's right, everybody. Today we're covering your favorite topic, debt and not having money. At the time of this recording, America's national debt is currently $37 trillion. The thing is, numbers this big are really difficult to actually put into perspective. So, here's a little visualization for you to realize how ridiculous this actually is. If you were to stack $100 bills on top of one another until you reach 37 trillion, the stack would reach to the moon and back 6 times. The moon, for reference, is 239,000 miles away. So yeah, it's a little bit of money. And listen, I totally get it. Your first thought is probably, big whoop, the government owes some money, who cares? But this figure affects you a lot more than you might realize. Because in order to service this debt, the government has a few different options. They can either cut costs by removing important government programs, and from what we saw of Elon Musk in the Doge campaign, this wasn't particularly effective. Or they can print more money, causing rampant inflation and devaluing everybody's cash. Or finally, they can increase taxation. And I don't need to tell you that nobody wants that to happen. So this poses the big question. How did America rack up such an absurd sum of debt? Who do we owe it to? And is it even prudent or possible to pay it off? But real quick before we get started, if you're interested in all things money, economics, and finances, make sure to subscribe. It's free and you can always change your mind. So how did America wind up with $37 trillion in debt? Well, the short answer is that the government spends more money than it collects through taxes. And instead of cutting back like a normal broke person, the government just borrows more. War, borrow money. Stimulus checks, borrow money. Tax cuts, let's borrow more. Basically, America runs its financial system like the friend that's owed you 20 bucks for the past 10 years. So here's the real question. Who's actually crazy enough to lend America $37 trillion? And well, the answer is actually everybody. Banks, pension funds, foreign governments, and even regular people or retail investors all buy into something called US Treasury bonds. Think of a US Treasury bond like an IOU from the government. You give Uncle Sam, say $1,000 today, and in exchange, he promises to pay you back in the future with a little bit on top in the form of interest. Investors love US Treasury bonds, one, because the United States has never missed a payment, and number two, because compared to things like stocks, crypto, and even the real estate market at times, a US bond is basically the world's safest bet. I.e., it is extremely unlikely for these to default, and if they do, it pretty much guarantees a destabilization of the dollar and a collapse of the American economy. So yeah, suffice it to say, hopefully that doesn't happen, but the probability of that is extremely low. So why can't we start working towards paying this deficit off and eventually getting out of debt? First of all, we have interest payments. Remember those treasury bonds we talked about? Well, the bigger the debt, the more interest America has to pay every year. It's like paying the minimum on a giant credit card, but instead of getting a new TV, we got a couple of wars, stimulus checks, and Social Security. In 2024, the US spent over $880 billion on just interest. That's more than we spent on our entire defense budget. Basically, Uncle Sam is being forced to pay billions, nearly trillions of dollars every single year just for the privilege of being broke. Then we move into expensive government programs and recurring annual expenses. To no one's surprise, we have defense spending. The Pentagon's budget is huge. It's over $850 billion a year. For perspective, that's more than the next 10 biggest countries put together. America spends more on its military than most countries spend on everything. I'm all about freedom and preserving democracy, but... Moving into the more civil side, we have healthcare and social programs. Things like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security eat up trillions of dollars a year. But as the overall population gets older and people are living longer than ever, without contributions increasing, these programs are running out of money. So what do they do when that happens? I'll give you a hint. It's our favorite word of the day, borrow. In fact, it's estimated that government funding for Social Security will be exhausted by 2033, with more people taking contributions than money coming into the system. So at that point, the government will have a difficult choice to make. They can either increase taxation, borrow more money, print more money, or abolish the program. Another factor of this deficit is politicians issuing tax cuts without any spending cuts. Listen, it's not complicated arithmetic. When you collect less and you spend the same amount, the deficit is going to get worse. That being said, America loves tax cuts. Politicians campaign on tax cuts. Everyone wants to keep more money in their pocket. But here's the obvious problem. If the government collects less in taxes, it's forced to borrow more to support all of its programs and expenses. It's basically the equivalent of you losing your job and then going out the next day and buying a yacht. So what happens long term if this debt isn't addressed? Well, the reality is America has no plans to pay this off nor means to actually do so. The government just keeps perpetually rolling the debt over. They issue new US government bonds to pay off the old bonds, and that just keeps on going on forever. The problem is that at a certain point, the interest is going to become so insurmountable that it's impossible to pay. This is financial musical chairs, but the music never stops. And like we established, eventually it will hit a breaking point. So with politicians continuing to ignore how serious this situation actually is, it could eventually lead to an extreme weakening of the US dollar or potentially a collapse of the entire US economy. The problem isn't defaulting tomorrow, it's the continued ballooning of the interest over a huge period of time. It's the equivalent of being broke enough that you can't meet the minimum payment on your credit card, but just putting it on another one and thinking to yourself, I'll take care of it later. It's not sustainable and eventually it will come crashing down. So can America pay off its debt? Well, no. The goal isn't paying it off. It's keeping it from becoming a dumpster fire that takes down the entire economy. What do you think the government should do? Should we just print more money? Should the rich pay more taxes? Should we get rid of needless government programs? Let me know in the comments down below. Long story short, they're going to continue to ignore it until something terrible happens. So subscribe. All right, subscribe now. See ya.